Father, Son, and Violin. A personal life story tells the vivid of Mao's China. Daniel Olson Chen. Dedicated to my parents and all of their generation.
Special acknowledgements.
My special thanks to Ms. Mercedes Larbenz. Without her encouragement and inspiration, hard work in editing, artwork and her publishing assistance, this book would never have been made public. Father, Son, and Violin. Chapter 12, A Broken Home and Scattered Family. 1. My family situation at the time. Although things were happening to me one after another, for the other members of our family it was a prosperous period, or even better, a period that could almost be called the prime of my family's life. Mother was given a more responsible position in her work unit, temporarily, due to a considerable portion of her colleagues being sent to the cadres concentration camp, to be transformed. In fact, my mom, as one of the loyalists, during the Cultural Revolution, people were divided into two distinct groups, loyalists and rebels. You had to be one or the other, there was nothing in between. My mom was on the most wanted list to be transformed, only because the company needed her outstanding working skills to keep things going in the spirit of, grasp the revolution and promote the production, was her name waived from the transformation list. Though she was no more than a group leader of about 10 people, temporarily, she felt very honored, satisfied, and had great self-importance, working her day and night willingly, like a horse, a she-horse. My brother Danson was very fond of school. He had always been, as the Americans say, a straight A student and the teacher's pet, also getting along well with his classmates. He was given a chance to pursue his studies in high school by the school authority. Only a small portion could go to high school at that time. My baby brother Danhan was in his 3rd elementary school year. Accidentally, Hunan acrobatics picked him up, repeatedly visiting our home to persuade mother to let her son go. Though indeed Mom had much doubt.
"If it were my second son you wanted,"
she said. In the end, she couldn't resist the bitter, sweet and grand words and so agreed to let Danhan have a try. Regarding me myself, my effort and sweat was rewarded with a quantum leap in violin playing ability, reaching a comparatively high level according to the local standard. I was also taken into consideration as a member of a sing and dance unit belonging to the Chinese People's Liberation Army. All I was waiting for was the result of my family background political record checkup to be an army violinist. This was supposed to be the highest honor and almost everyone's dream who learned violin at the time. If that really did happen, it could solve all the problems, well, if not all, at least most major problems between my family and I. I was very jealous and curious about Danhan being taken to Hunan acrobatics. Without asking Mom, I went to see him training. Not even close to the practice hall, I heard children screaming in misery. It sounded like a slaughterhouse. I gathered my courage and pushed the door open. Various inhumane postures appeared before my eyes. Children were standing on hands, on heads, or on someone's shoulder and someone else's shoulder. Others were riding a bicycle backwards and some rolling in the air. Just when I was starting to feel a kind of novelty about the scene, the horrible screeching of my brother drew my attention. I saw Danhan in a corner, leaning against the wall, legs spread in a line. The coach put his knee against Danhan's chest and gave a deadly push against the wall. At the same time he called 2 little ones to sit on my brother's thighs and used his own hands to press the trainee's shoulders down. Danhan was in so much pain that he held his breath, making him unable to cry out. Bean-sized sweat was rolling from his forehead, nearly a waterfall. Even when my brother looked faint, the rock-hearted coach showed no signs of ending the torture. Witnessing this, a sudden impulse of grief hit my heart. It was the first time, so evidently and strongly I felt that this boy in agony was my own flesh and blood. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I deliberately went to greet the coach. Indeed, as I wanted the coach to let go of my brother. Dan Hen shrank, rolling on the floor with pain. A short while later, he crawled to me and embraced my leg, begging me to take him home. It was really rare for him to make me feel like a big brother. Immediately I made up a story that our mom was sick and needed him back. Returning home with a few still functioning yet loose bones, Dan Hen begged Mother with tears, saying that he'd rather be dead than to go back to the acrobatic business. He also promised to be an even better boy at home from then on. He would listen to Mom and do whatever he was asked to do, even the dishes after every meal. In actuality, Mom was reluctant to send Dan Hen to Hunan Acrobatics in the first place, not only because of the bitterness and hardship of training, but because in that era, nothing was easy. Mom felt sorry to have a 9-year-old starting work as it sounded like child labor. Besides, if Dan Hen started working, he would have the remotest possibility of going back to school again. On the positive side, Mom thought Dan Hen should learn acrobatics, because it was at that time, Jiang Qing's, great leader Chairman Mao's wife, the one who rebuilt Chinese show business after the total devastation of Chinese art and literature at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. Show soldiers with their gray uniforms were among the top echelon in the social hierarchy. As for Danson, Mom decided that he was born to study, therefore she was prepared to use all family resources to support him, up to university if Danson wanted and could. Very deep in her heart, Mom probably regretted to a certain degree that she had prompted Father to give up his university studies, English literature, in order to be a full-time revolutionary when they first met. About me, Mom thought it would be the best solution that I join the army, as, A, spiritually she would no longer need to worry that I was led astray, B, politically, to have a soldier son was regarded as honorable and prestigious. What a shortcut to turn a bad apple into a source of pride. C, economically there would be one horse less at the dining table. I was born in the year of horse. One evening, Mom was sitting outside, enjoying one of her rare leisure hours in the gentle summer breeze. Perhaps she felt lonely, or more possibly it was intentional. She started to chat with me. She expressed her belief that my elder brother Danson and I would do okay and that my baby brother Dan Hen remained her unique concern. She sighed emotionally.
You brothers will soon be adults. After your independence, in case your father doesn't come back, I think I can manage by myself.
I didn't try to figure out the inner meaning of her words, but was instead busy recalling the last time she had mentioned my father. After Chu Xiaolin's flight to freedom. Now let me bring our story back to what happened after Chu Xiaolin flew to freedom. The moment she jumped out the window, her soul split away from her body, floating in the vast air, and observed the body falling down on a truck's canvas top. The truck driver, who was waiting for the traffic light to change, heard a huge bang. He scolded.
Who the fuck's throwing things down like that?
It wouldn't be hard to imagine how shocked the driver was when he saw Chu's body full of blood on his truck. Soon, Chu's father wheezed, rolling down from the 4th floor in his pajamas and slippers. He embraced the body of his daughter and shouted at the driver,
"Hospital, hospital!"
After an hour of long waiting, anxiously the father rushed toward a doctor who had just come out of the operating room.
How is my daughter, doctor?"
The doctor responded routinely.
"We did everything we could, yet it's still too early to draw a conclusion. But even if she makes it, her condition will most likely be critical."
The father, Pa, kneeled by the doctor's feet.
Please. You save my daughter, otherwise my wife will also die of heartbreak. I beg you. I pray for you and the happiness of your whole family."
What happened to Jiang Langsha? About Chu's taking books out of the library, her maternal uncle named Zhou, the husband of her aunt who worked at the library, reacted with the most extraordinary panic. When the news of Chu's suicide reached the uncle's ear, it was like pouring oil on fire. The outraged uncle decided to punish the one behind Chu's stealing of books that caused the dreadful tragedy. The uncle was a small head of the rebels. The whole of China was the rebels' world by the time. They held the actual power of government in the country. Therefore, rebels' so-called public order-keeping command headquarters practically replaced the police force and law court. Uncle Zhou led a group of fully armed order keepers and went to Jiang's little hut. They tied Jiang up without pressing charges. Then implemented the Cultural Revolution routine and seized the little hut, searching it thoroughly. Beneath the bed, they found the box of books.
I knew you were the apple of discord. Take the criminal together with the booty.
Uncle Zhou ordered. Meanwhile, a full coal-loaded train approached. Jiang put everything aside. As he was tied up, in desperation he jumped to fall on the wooden box, the only love his father left to him.
These are my books, not the library's books.
The train was getting closer and closer, but the people present paid little attention. Order Keeper A kicked Jiang's bottom and roared.
How dare you to defend yourself?
Jiang was struggling in despair and pled.
These are novels I inherited from my father. What Xiaolan took from the library were mostly music scores, not novels.
Whatever you say, you tell us where those books are. I mean the music books.
Order Keeper B demanded.
I don't know. I really don't.
Jiang answered. Order Keeper A kicked Jiang again and shouted.
Tell us the truth now, or I'll beat you to death.
Beating people to death happened every day during that period, by order keepers. What a tragic paradox. I hid myself near the little hut and peeped through, watching the whole process. Until then I knew nothing about what had happened to Xiaolan, nor could I clearly hear their conversation, but by instinct I guessed it was something to do with the music scores and books Xiaolan took from the library and left at Uncle Feng's place. I started to fear that Jiang might be compelled to sell his sister Xiaolan out, which I would never do. Just as I was thinking of running away, a sharp steam whistle split the air. Woo! Based on my earlier observations and knowledge, I knew it was time to switch the rail. I dashed toward Jiang and blared out the warning.
Switch rail, train coming.
Jiang heard me. Like waking up from a dream, he loudly shouted.
Set me loose, or the train will derail.
Uncle Zhou realized what could happen. He cut the rope to set Jiang free as quickly as he could. Jiang streaked off toward the rail switcher like an arrow from a bow. When Jiang started to switch the rail, the two order keepers carrying his bookcase and striding across the railway distracted him from his work. He chased them again, leaving the rail half switched. The three of them refused to budge, right in the middle of the railway. The bookcase slammed down on the ground, books scattered all over. The two order keepers realized the train was drawing near and fled for their lives while Jiang lay on his stomach covering the bookcase with his body, stretching his arms to cover the dispersed books like a hen protecting her chicks.
Run away.
I screamed.
Run quickly, you bastard. You want to die?
Joined Uncle Zhou. But Jiang was as steady as a statue. Woo, woo. The train kept howling. I knew if I stood there doing nothing the train would derail and Jiang would end up a heap of minced meat, so I rushed to finish the rail switching. I exerted all my strength, but as a 14-year-old I was just not strong enough to make the rail switch complete. The train driver, too, noticed the abnormal situation and applied the emergency brake. The train whipped by my side approaching the rail junction, getting closer, 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters from Jiang and his books. Jangling harshly, the train stopped. The whole thing made my flesh crawl. But Uncle Zhou quickly adjusted himself from the shock, indignantly bawling out at Jiang.
Want to die? Ah. That's too easy for you. My niece Xiaolan, alive is your wife, dead is your ghost. You can't get away from?
Meanwhile, a steam whistle reached us from a remote distance in the opposite direction. The derailed train driver hurriedly jumped down from his train. With a danger red light, he ran towards the oncoming train. A fatal occurrence 3/3 of March that affected the destiny of our whole family. That same evening, I was too uneasy for my routine violin practice by the railway. Instead, I went close to Zhang's hut to inquire with the perspective of meeting Chu, so that I could find out what all that was about. From out of the hut came an unknown person somewhat resembling one of the order keepers, then another and Uncle Zhou. Then, I was sure they were the trouble-making order keepers. Uncle Zhou said something to the other two, and the three of them headed in the direction of my home with rifles and ropes. Immediately I took a short cut to the house. Back home Mom was absent, working overtime. I told my two bothers that someone might come looking for me. If that happened, tell them I'm away from home and won't be back for a long time. While Danson was doubting my story, a savage knock was heard at our door. Immediately, Danson asked his two younger brothers to hide back in the kitchen. I did what he ordered, yet Danhan refused to leave. The order keepers gave our door a mighty kick, it flew open. My little brother blocked the doorway with his emaciated body. Uncle Zhou lifted him up in the air like a little chicken and interrogated.
Where is that boy called Nine, brother?
My baby brother struggled with his arms and legs in the air and shouted like the little revolutionaries in the new China movies.
I don't know.
And finished by spitting a mouthful of slobber on Uncle Zhou's face. Uncle Zhou dropped my brother and quickly wiped the slobber with the cuff of his sleeve before it could flow into his mouth. Danhen slammed down on the ground and rolled with pain. Danson helped his little brother stand up and yelled at Uncle Zhou.
You think you can bully us because we have no adults home?
But as soon as my silent little brother rebounded from the ground, he rushed up to Uncle Zhou again. With an uncertain reflex, Uncle Zhou tried to grasp him but was firmly bitten by the little lion. The pain was so excruciating that Uncle Zhou screamed to the other two.
What the hell are you guys waiting for? Take him!
Simultaneously he punched my little brother's head with his other hand. Uncle Zhou's action pushed my always gentle and peaceful brother Danson to the limit. He stepped up to Uncle Zhou and rewarded him with a merciless blow, soon turning Uncle Zhou's face into a half panda. When it turned toward violence, I decided to go out and fight them to the death. But Mimi grabbed me tightly and said,
You're stupid. A wise man should not fight when it is an obvious loss. Run.
She pushed me out the back door. My mom heard about what was going on and ran back home. Seeing her 9 and 15-year-old sons trussed up and escorted by armed order keepers, she immediately lost consciousness, falling to the ground, soiling her pants. Mimi hurried to take care of my mom. I went to look for a flatbed cart. Together, Mimi and I transported my mom to the hospital. Mimi took my mother's dirty clothes off and asked me to wash them in a pond outside the hospital. When I was done and back at the hospital, the doctor ordered me. Ask your father to come here at once. His tone left no room for discussion. Mimi also said to me,
Go, go, go. Don't worry, I will be here all the while. Go and get your father to come here as quickly as possible.
Her tone also sounded as if my father was eating at a restaurant somewhere nearby. The above happened on the 3rd of March 1971. So our family calls it the 3/3 occurrence, an occurrence so fatal it affected the destiny of our entire family. to conquer all obstacles looking for father. Facing such a huge family crisis, even if the doctor had not ordered it, I would have had to find my father and get him home. But where? I had no detailed address, only the name of the county where father's May 7th cadre school was located. If it were today, I could send him an email, or a fax, or simply make a call from my cell phone. Yet the situation then left me no alternative but to go in person. I hitched a night truck to look for my father, the family man who was never very much with the family. The driver was an open, easygoing young man. He chatted with me all the way, except for asking me if I was hungry. When we reached a resting spot, at last, he asked me if I would like to buy something to eat as he was going to do. I quickly searched my pocket and realized I had only 10 RMB lunch money. I awkwardly told a story that I wasn't really hungry since I ate too much for supper. I waited in the truck with my empty stomach, hoping the driver would come back with some leftovers. The truck driver came back without my hope, of course. Therefore, I planned to sleep all the way in order to economize my energy. However, by bad luck, the truck couldn't get started. All the driver's effort spinning the engine handle was in vain. The driver finally gave up and said to me, "It looks like you have to sleep with me overnight, though the truck is a little small for two." I was too anxious to wait. I jumped down from the truck and walked on. The driver shouted at my back, "Walk along for about 10 kilometers, there's another resting spot. Wait for me there if you don't find another lift." 10 kilometers distance in the dark cold took a 14-year-old boy hours to conquer. When I set my feet on the spot, it was already dawn. I inquired at each truck one by one, asking their destination, and finally found one heading in my father's direction. The driver was a quiet middle-aged man. As he felt uneasy having me sitting together with him in the front, I climbed on the back of his truck and sat on the goods. I discovered what I sat on was a gunny of Chinese jujubes. I dug a little hole with my fingers and started to cram my gullet voraciously. I was so thirsty that the jujubes got stuck on their way to my stomach. If it had started to rain so I could have a little drink, that would be communism to me. The truck suddenly stopped and the driver came to me and said,
"Come to the front, boy, because if you freeze to death, I don't want to take responsibility."
When I gratefully and happily jumped down from the back, about to get in the front, my mouth betrayed me. The driver immediately changed his attitude and bawled out, "You're a little thief. Get lost, roll away." Besides being in the middle of nowhere, he also left my face smothered in dust from the truck wheels. Again, I had to make good use of my manpower to move forward. Hours later, I passed by a farm. As it seemed nobody was watching, I dug a Chinese sweet potato from the field. I had sufficient practice when I was about 6, and hid myself behind a big tree chewing it, together with mud. When I felt recharged, I returned back to the road. Again I met the second driver who had dropped me off a few hours ago. On his truck, in front, after driving for some time, he told me that the reason he decided to pick me up again was that my hungry face reminded him of the year 1960, in which he was beaten for stealing flesh from dead bodies, which was his only meat source. When we were at a rest stop, he bought a bowl of noodle and shared it 50/50ths with me. He took me near the county center and then handed me over to another driver.
"This boy is my remote relative. Please take care of him."
I finally arrived at the county center, but still didn't know where to find my father. When I tried to get into the county administration bureau to make an inquiry, I was driven out by the doorkeeper. No beggars allowed in front of the county bureau. From the county office I learned the possible location of my father was about a 30-kilometer country road away. In fact, he was closer to where I was handed over to the third driver. I had no choice but to go on foot. When my shoes opened their mouths, I used some tree bark to cover the holes and continued my journey. By late afternoon I met a small group of educated youth on a hill. One of them said he knew nothing about my father, while another said even if he knew he couldn't tell me, and the third said he actually knew where my father was but did not want to tell me. This made me want to cry out in frustration. After I moaned to them the tragedy that was happening in my family, a tall fellow said he might be able to help me, a little. Instantly my sadness turned to happiness. Then the tall man said, "It's too late to go down there today. Let's wait until tomorrow." Though no one obviously invited me, I followed the group wherever they went. At the top of the hill the beautiful landscape popped in front of my eyes. The declining twilight reminded me of my Uncle Din's out-of-tune singing, "The eastern sun is declining down the western hill." Why did he always sing it wrong when the correct lyric should be, "The twilight is declining down the western hill"? Whatever. My heavy mood was jarred by the marvelous natural scenery. After a while the tall man covered my eyes with a towel and with his hand, I was led into a clandestine cave. There were 5 young men and 1 young woman living in the cave. Watching them cook food, I couldn't control my saliva flowing so much so that I had to utilize my usual technique, sleep. Drowsily, I heard noises. Half sleeping, half awake, I saw one man was doing it with the woman and another 2 were lining up for their turn. The next morning, the tall fellow escorted me all the way down. On the way he expressed his envy of me for having a father, unlike he who had no father to care for him since he was very little. He let his tears out while I had to swallow mine down into my stomach. Little by little he also told me about their group. They are 6 defecting educated youths out from my father's farm. The cadres, like my father at the May 7th cadre school, were in charge of the educated youth. The 6 formed a special family with 5 husbands sharing 1 wife. Meeting father. After 2 nights and 2 days obstacles, I finally reached my father. You know what he was doing? He was blowing a harmonica, taking part in a rehearsal of the educated youth propaganda team. He showed little surprise in seeing me suddenly appear before his eyes, as if I was just one of the herd. I couldn't ruin his good mood. I had to sit down and wait. Only a few seconds later I started sawing logs, snoring, which reinforced father's propaganda noise, sorry, propaganda music. When I woke it was time for supper. Father's room was small and simple. A female educated youth was cooking on an alcohol stove. She didn't look so bad except a little oversized, not for the standard today but at that time. What shocked me more was seeing my father's watch on her wrist, the watch mother gave father as a keepsake that he said he lost somewhere, maybe it's in more needed hands. The unfamiliar gentleness and kind manner towards the girl made father more of a stranger to me. Before the meal, father very briefly introduced the girl to me, calling her something like big sister, and then they ate and chatted their concerns as if I didn't exist. The whole scene made me feel that without us, the man was more comfortable and happier out there in the farm. If it were true, that big sister must be part of the reason. If that was the case, then not only me, but the whole family were his heavy burden. Though my stomach was totally empty, soon it was overflowing with anger by viewing this scene. I shouted at father.
Something bad is happening back home. Hurry up, go back.
Then he asked big sister to go away and father listened to my description of the situation back home. Of course I reserved the fact that Chu taking books out of the library might be the basic and direct reason for the entire occurrence, as I still wasn't sure what exactly Uncle Zhou wanted so badly from Jiang and I. Hearing my report, father's facial expression returned back to the usual deep frown that I was mostly familiar with. I stayed at my father's place for only 1 night, which was 1/4 the time I spent getting to him. The next morning he gave me a pair of his used homemade cotton shoes, plus a few yuan RMB, and showed me the way to the long-distance bus stop. After telling me how to make my trip, he returned back to his farm and left me alone, hours waiting for the bus to come. I did all I wanted to do, as well as what the doctor and Umimi asked me to do, which was to pass the message to my father. I did not expect father to go back with me right away. I knew that as a party member he couldn't do anything without the party's approval. To be in a country of selfless ideology, asking for leave from work for family affairs took courage and time. Six. Farewell, the residency and home. I returned, and found my home was in chaos after being searched by the order keepers. Mother and Danson were still not in, only Danhen the 9-year-old. Having gone through this catastrophe together, seeing him again sent a throb of excitement and pain to my heart, pushing me to hug him. He, however, rejected my emotion with a nimble dodge. Hatefully he accused me.
It's all your fault. You tore my family into pieces.
He carried his small school bag and strode out of the house.
Where are you going?
I chased him as he went out the door and asked.
It's none of your damn business. I don't know you.
Those were the last few words my little brother left me with. To speak to me again was many years later. Although Danhen is not my son but a brother, and we never got along that well, watching his back fading away out of sight, I suddenly felt a gust of distress, like a piece of flesh being sliced off my body. Umimi told me my home was searched thoroughly soon after my mother was sent to the hospital. Although they didn't find the music scores they wanted, they did find several of my mother's old diaries. Reading them, they became suspicious that Mom could have been a member of the Third Youth League at one time, during her high school years before the liberation. This was considered to be a political stain. The Third Youth League is attached to the Chinese Kuomintang, in parallel to the Chinese Youth League attached to the Chinese Communist Party. For that suspicion, Mom was sent directly to the Cadres concentration camp for further investigation after being treated in the hospital for only 2 days. My little brother Danhen was only kept in detention for 1 night. As it became a home without a family, the 9-year-old kept taking care of it all by himself. He borrowed Umimi's fire to cook 1 bowl of gruel and subsisted on it all day. Every day he went to visit Uncle Zhou at the hospital. He begged for mercy, kneeling before his sickbed. The little lion offered to sacrifice all 8 of his incisors to trade for his brother Danson's freedom. The family baby also asked Umimi to pass his words to anyone and everyone in the family, that it was he himself who decided to go back to the Hunan acrobatics, therefore no need to try to find him. For the sake of never being bullied and humiliated again, he would train himself to be a Hercules. Until then he would not show his face to the public. Hence, I was left alone at home. As a matter of fact, I had never felt so lonely and so scared. If it were before, whenever alone it was my chance to practice my violin, but then, I was not at all in the mood to touch my beloved instrument. I went to see the place where Danson was being held, which was a detention area temporarily borrowed from Hunan Medical College's classrooms. I could only peep at the place from a distance as I was afraid of being caught. I also visited Mother at the Cadres concentration camp, but the doorman barred me from going in since the rule was, cadres under investigation are not allowed to meet their families. Later I found out that besides the rule, it was also the good-hearted doorman who did not want a young boy's feelings to be hurt too badly, for my mom was locked up in a cow barn. The same as vast numbers of Chinese were treated during the Cultural Revolution. No doubt, I went to Zhang's wooden hut, but the newcomer had no idea about the whole thing. To me, Uncle Feng's place remained the last hope for finding Chu Xiaolin and the truth behind the whole ordeal. Sadly, the result of my visit was no result. Now you see how pathetic it was that I, together with everyone around me, were experiencing such an awful occurrence without even knowing the real reason. I was turned into an ant in a hot pot, restlessly counting my minutes day and night. Almost a long month later, Father came back, finally. I found out later he was on an errand for the party, so sent back to the city. That means he wasn't home specifically for the sake of the family but by coincidence. That was, however, quite understandable and common, as in that era the party business was regarded as heavy as a mountain and family affairs as light as a feather. I, as a boy always distanced from his father, this time felt like throwing myself into his safe hands. I had never so strongly felt the great importance of having a family man at home. Nevertheless, his clay-colored face and cold mood functioned like the negative pole of a magnet, keeping me away eternally, at a decided distance. Father put his baggage down and went out right away. No need to ask, he surely went to rescue my mom and brother. I thought. I started to make a coal fire and prepare supper, which I had stopped doing for about a month now. Seldom in my life, without Mom's consent, did I cut off a piece of meat from a moldy pig head that had hung on the wall for ages. I quickly fried up a dish of garlic and pig head meat. I dare say that was the most attractive and most delicious meal I had ever cooked in my entire short life. Waiting for the clock to show supper time, I set the table expecting Father to come back. If it were not that day but any other day in the preceding 14 years, I would have replaced chopsticks with my fingers to peck little by little from the dish. But on that day, though revolution was going on madly in my stomach, my indomitable will stood strong. Hour after hour Father did not show. I had to heat up my beautiful meal over and over again. Any footsteps or even a rustle of leaves in the wind made me rush to the door.
Baba, the supper is ready,
Was a sentence I practiced countless times. But when Father really came back, I had fallen asleep, bent over at the table. Father's slap on the table woke me with a start. Vaguely, I saw my father's metal ashen face like a fearsome devil. Though the volume was not loud, the tone was extremely resolute and authoritative.
Bring all the books from the library here at once.
I have no books from the library.
I tried to play an edge ball.
I will say it again and no more. Bring all the books from the library here, now.
Father ordered with an increasing volume.
Really, I took no books from the library.
I quibbled again.
I have no time for this.
Father said as he started looking for something to beat me with in order to prevent his hands from being hurt.
Music scores.
I changed my words.
You want me to bring out books and of course I can't. I only have music scores for my violin.
Again. That handling? I knew it. I knew from the very beginning it would cause trouble.
Father burst into rage.
It's not handlin. It is called a violin.
I corrected him. Though I knew he said it on purpose, for the purpose of insulting the instrument and the boy who loves the instrument. Seeing him continuously busy looking for something to beat me with, I started to be aware that there was no way to escape. Without any more ado, I headed directly at him.
It wasn't me who took the music scores out of the library, but even if you beat me to death, I will not tell you who did it. I'll never sell out my friend.
Your friend? Ha, you don't have a friend. You will have a cabbage or a dead body. Haven't you heard Chu Xiaolin jump down from the 4th floor?
That was the first time I was told about Xiaolin's destiny. Father ordered again.
Do as I say, bring your handlin to the table, now.
doing it again just to show his disdain towards the instrument, or more precisely towards me. If it were normal circumstances, I would rather die than retrieve my violin. But on that day, I was in a state of shock over Chu Xiaolin's tragedy. In addition, I thought handing over the violin might do some good in extricating my brother from detention, so I fetched my violin from underneath my bed and presented it on the table. To Father, the violin was the root of all evil, and it was time to dig the root out. Father tried to open the violin case but didn't know how. He gave me a glance, a signal to open it, and I did accordingly. Father took my violin from the case and raised it above his head and then smashed it on the table, causing the dish I made to fall down and all over the ground. My violin screamed out terribly. My father broke not only my violin but also my heart into pieces, as well as the term father. Perhaps all these I expected. I reacted considerably calm. I crawled on the ground to pick up the broken pieces of my violin that had jumped off the table and put them into my case. Father's face looked longer and more bitter than ever. He uttered repentantly,
I am also to blame, as I was too generous and didn't cut the evil root at its sprout state.
Father said that as he grabbed the head of my violin from my hand and slammed it on the ground again.
I regret.
He knocked on the table with his fist, causing a don sound. Again I crawled down on the ground to pick up my violin pieces. Each time my hand touched a piece, it reminded me how I had made them with each stroke of the knife, chisel, and file. My wounded hand during the violin making started to feel pain again. Seeing me, Father attempted to take my violin pieces from the case. I held the case in my arms to protect them as if they were my babies. My mind was made. This time, even if he kills me, I won't let my children suffer from the trample again. As Father showed no sign of giving up, I exclaimed with grievance.
What exactly did I do wrong? Who did I offend? I just want to play the violin and to be a violinist. What's wrong with that?
The more I yelled, the more I felt the injustice that made me lose my mind. I furiously threw the whole violin case down on the ground and hysterically shouted.
Are you satisfied now?
Father paused. Only for a second, he uttered in despair.
You roll out. Our family doesn't have such a son. You roll out. Our family doesn't have such a son.
In actuality, such announcement for my father was unnecessary, as I had already been on my way out with my broken violin and heart. I didn't know where to go, but what I did know was that was a place I used to call home, and I would never want to return. What exactly did I do wrong? Who did I offend? I just want to play the violin and to be a violinist. What's wrong with that? Those are questions that bothered me for decades, until recently, when I came to realize that the real evil root was not the violin, but me being different, and my desire to be an individual human rather than a communist-manufactured robot, a tool, a nail in the socialist machine, as people were literally called in China during the era. That sin offended the majority of the communist community. Home, inside that nest I grew up in for nearly 15 years, the place had been extraordinarily noisy with quarrel and joy. The zone used to be safe and secure, then became a hollow of emptiness, leaving only Father's inclining shadow from the dim light and a thick smoke out of his mouth to accompany.